It's your friendly neighborhood ghoul back to talk about some messed up horror films. So check your trigger warnings. Cannot stress that enough. Check your trigger warnings. So I see a lot of creators make lists of some of the most messed up films they've ever seen, and there's a lot of crossover. A lot of people talk about a Serbian film, Salo, Irreversible, Cannibal Holocaust, The Girl Next Door. If they're into underground horror, they might mention the August Underground trilogy, but these three films I rarely see mentioned. So number one is Dogtooth, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, who is also the director of The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which was just amazing. This film is his most uncomfortable, in my opinion, out of all three. And the concept is basically you have parents who are trying to shield their adult children from the outside world, and they do this by confining them to the house and teaching them all sorts of backwards things, like the word for wall is dog and the word for grass is cat, and things like that. It is unsettling. It is very uncomfortable, to say the least. Not sure what the critic meant by hilarious unless he means hilariously uncomfortable. So, the second film is The Eyes of My Mother. This one was directed by Nicholas Pesci, and it is a very difficult film to get through. It is all black and white with no soundtrack and pretty much no dialogue whatsoever, so you have to sit in silence with this film with nothing but the sound design, which again is on point. The movie is about a father and daughter who are holding a man captive that unalived the mother. Eventually, the father passes away, and the adult daughter becomes the caregiver of the captive. By the time I got to the end of this movie, I felt like I had just seen something that I was not supposed to see. Extremely dark. And the third film, which is the most intense out of all three I'm talking about, is Flowers, directed by Phil Stevens and released in 2015. Again, this movie has no soundtrack and no dialogue, only sound design, and it actually took me 3 times to get through the film because in the first 5 minutes there's a scene that was just a little bit too much for me, to say the least, but I'm glad I got through it because it was actually a beautifully tragic film. Yeah. So the concept is you have a serial unaliver who unalives women and keeps them in the floorboards, and one by one, even though they're dead, they sort of come alive, and they're crawling around underneath the house and going through the walls and going into all these really surreal, disgusting places and coming to terms with the fact that they are not alive anymore. It is one of the very few movies that have ever made me audibly gag, but I do have to say, it was beautifully done. It made me feel very sad, like a pit in the stomach kind of sadness after watching it. But I'm glad that I did. So, do I recommend these movies? Not unless you're a fan of extreme horror. But if you are, check them out.